For 25-year-old New York State Assemblyman Theodore Roosevelt, February 1884 began joyously.
He was the happiest man on the planet. His wife had just given birth to a baby girl.
But then came some distressing news.
He gets a telegram saying, "Come back immediately. Your wife is dying and your mother is dying."
The future president rushed from Albany home to Manhattan to find the two most important women in his life suddenly fallen ill. His mother Martha with typhoid fever, his young bride Alice with Bright's disease, a failure of the kidneys.
His younger brother Elliot ran out of the house and said, "There is a plague on this house." He got there just in time for his wife to die in his arms, and his mother died shortly later. It was just awful.
His diary entry that grim Valentine's Day, a stark X and 8 simple words. Roosevelt needed to get far, far away.
And he knew he had to do something to restore his soul.
Ted Roosevelt IV is President Theodore Roosevelt's great-grandson.
It just devastated him. And he had enough sense. He knew that he had to throw himself into work. He had to be in the outdoors.
And so he headed west to the wildest, loneliest place he knew, the Badlands of the Dakota Territory, in what is now North Dakota.
He described it as a bizarrely shaped country with a haunting, melancholy beauty. Everything, the hills, the kinds of trees, the grass here, this is exactly what he saw.
For 3 years, he lived here, along the Little Missouri River, in the shade of the cottonwood trees.
There's no sound that is more soothing than the wind going through the cottonwood leaves. It makes a lovely rustle. It's just beautiful.
But the trees, they kind of glitter.
Yeah, they have that wonderful glitter.
These are the same trees T.R. saw from the front porch of his Elkhorn Ranch, and the same kind of birds he heard.
Hear the dove in the background? Coo, coo. T.R. wrote about the dove. There can be no more mournful sound of unending grief than the sound of a mourning dove.
We're walking up to what would be the entrance?
Yeah, this is the entrance. What they've
The
done.
ranch house the old lion built with his own hands is gone now. Only the foundation stones remain.
So this is original.
So that's original, absolutely.
And I have to say that as a history buff, I kind of geek out on something like this. I mean, it's just
Oh, it's kind of cool.
to think that Theodore Roosevelt laid this in 1884.
Yes.
2 guides he'd befriended in the woods of Maine came west to help.
He was good with an axe, but he overheard the 2 guides talking amongst themselves, and they said something to the effect, "Well, we chopped each down 35 trees, and the boss, he beavered down 17.
It's still impressive. The formerly asthmatic child is beavering down 17 trees.
And that's that's no mean accomplishment.
Yes, Roosevelt was a sickly child who by non-stop activity bulldozed through obstacles, the embodiment of the strenuous life.
Talking about Theodore Roosevelt's energy, please don't take this the wrong way, but was there some sort of chemical imbalance? I mean, just his ability to do so much.
That's a great question. He wrote, I think poignantly, if a man rides hard and fast enough, he can leave black hair behind him. He knew that he had to really engage himself all the time because he might get depressed.
He became a cattleman, albeit a Harvard-educated aristocratic one.
The people out west, and this was really out west then, must have thought that he was from a totally different world.
Yeah, totally different world. He wore glasses, which was unusual. He dressed in a fancy way. He used language in a way that was totally different than theirs. But the experience was one which rubbed off this sort of thin, brittle veneer of the Eastern dude, and he became a regular guy.
And this wild, beautiful land shaped the way Roosevelt viewed the environment. That's why it's known as the cradle of conservation.
It's where he learned, and he saw firsthand the need to save the land.
But today, this view, virtually unchanged for more than 100 years, is indeed beginning to change as North Dakota's oil boom encircles the Elkhorn Ranch with pump jacks, gas flares, and roadways.
There is a rig there on the ridgeline that would not have been here in Theodore Roosevelt's day. It's one of 7 wells that are within the historic district.
Stephanie Meeks is executive director of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which has placed the Elkhorn Ranch on its most endangered places list.
It's a visual intrusion in a place that was one of solitude. So we'd like to protect anything that Teddy Roosevelt could have seen from the front porch of his cabin.
It's not just the sights that are threatened, but also the sounds that soothed TR's wounded soul.
That's what we want to preserve. It's the solitude, the scenic beauty of this, and the sound.
The man who would go on to create 5 national parks and protect 230 million acres of land once said, "I never would have been president if it had not been for my experiences in North Dakota."
He wanted to protect great landscapes for the American people for all time, and it's our turn now to protect this landscape so that it can influence and inspire people for generations, just as it did Teddy Roosevelt.